And good evening, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Sam Brock, in for Gadi Schwartz, coming to you from Miami. Here are some of the stories that we're watching tonight, starting with former President Donald Trump attacking the judge on day one of his fraud trial.
Because he's a Democrat club politician. He's a Democrat operative, and he's a disgrace.
The judge is also serving as the jury. It's a bench trial in a case that could see Trump permanently barred from operating a business in the state of New York. Also in New York, a 9-year-old girl who police feared had been abducted has been found safe. We'll have the latest on what police are saying about a suspect. And some 75,000 healthcare workers across a half a dozen states could go on strike this week. What this would mean for Kaiser Permanente's nearly 13 million patients. And General Mark Milley retired this week after 4 years as the country's most senior military officer. We'll hear about a concern he had that made him say this.
So I wanted to make sure it was clear to the American people, to our adversaries, to our friends and allies overseas, but also to our own force, to us wearing the uniform, that we have zero, and I mean zero, role in U.S. electoral politics.
And there is breaking news as we come on air tonight. Charlotte Senna, that missing 9-year-old girl in upstate New York, has been found and in good health. In the last hour, we also learned that a suspect is in custody. Charlotte had been missing since Saturday in what police described as possibly an abduction while on a bike ride at Moreau Lake State Park. Rescue teams have been searching an area almost 50 square miles, pretty much around the clock, as we are still learning at this hour how she was found. But the incredible news moments ago that Charlotte is safe. On that note, with a sigh of relief, Kristen Dahlgren joining us this evening. And Kristen, after almost 48 hours missing, give or take, do we have any idea at this point how they located Charlotte?
You know, Sam, we still don't at this point. We watched it unfold here. We first saw, the car going out of here with the lights on, screaming, peeling out of the state park where they've been doing the searching. And then we saw her family arrive, and word started to trickle out. And finally, the state police confirmed that 9-year-old Charlotte had been found. She was alive. She was in good health, and that they did have that suspect in custody. Tonight, state police say that they are not going to be offering any more updates, that they will be updating tomorrow morning. But we were able to see this amazing moment with her family. They all came out. They wanted to thank the media for being here, for keeping Charlotte, in the headlines and keep the search going, and thank everybody for all of the support the family's gotten. They were cheering, they were yelling, they were smiling. They said they haven't yet been able to see her, but they were hoping to have that reunion at some point, and they were just thrilled that after 48 hours, this has ended on a positive note, Sam.
It warms your heart. And, we've all been on both sides of outcomes of these kinds of stories. When you see police start racing somewhere, you don't know what's going on, Kristen. I know you've spoken with Charlotte's family. What are they saying about the events that led up to this on Saturday?
Right. So I had a chance to talk with her aunt extensively today as that search was going on. And so she was telling me, Charlotte's such a good girl, and there was no way that she would have run away. And she really is just a unique and special kid, that she had wanted to go on this bike ride by herself. And here's what her aunt told me about how quickly she vanished. Take a listen.
She disappeared almost into thin air. I mean, it was minutes between when she was last seen and when she wasn't there anymore.
And it really seemed like she had vanished without a trace. They have been searching these woods, as you said, almost 50 miles of them. I saw them going shoulder to shoulder and kind of combing through, cutting the brush so that they could see if there were any clues out there, any sign of this 9-year-old. And then finally, they got the break that they needed tonight, Sam.
Yeah, the details will come, but no doubt gratitude and relief for that family and that community this evening. Kristen Dahlgren, thank you so much.
You bet.
In New York, the civil fraud lawsuit against former President Trump began this morning, and it was quite a tension-filled first day, to say the least. The legal action brought by New York's Attorney General seeks an array of punishments, including a $250 million financial penalty. And it's not against Trump, the former president, per se, but against Trump, the real estate mogul, and Trump, the businessman. That civil lawsuit accuses him of lying about his net worth and that of his businesses, inflating them to get better loan terms and reducing those values for tax purposes. New York's AG, Letitia James, seated right there behind Trump as proceedings began. According to our reporters in the courtroom, Trump quite literally stared down James today before leaving for lunch. James, for her part, not backing off either, sharing a strong and straightforward message outside court before the day started.
Donald Trump and the other defendants have committed persistent and repeated fraud. My message is simple. No matter how powerful you are, no matter how much money you think you may have, no one is above the law.
Now, Mr. Trump is not facing any jail time if the verdict doesn't go his way, but he is at risk of losing a handful of his big-name New York properties and also paying, as we mentioned, millions, hundreds of millions in damages. As you can imagine, the former president's response has been forceful. He is also denying all wrongdoing, and in front of a large cluster of cameras today, he attacked the judge and the New York Attorney General for filing the lawsuit in the first place.
This is a judge that should be disbarred. This is a judge that should be out of office. This rogue judge, a Trump hater, the only one that hates Trump more is his associate up there, his person that works with him. She's screaming into his ear on almost every time we ask a question. A disgrace.
All right, there is certainly a lot to unpack here. For that, let's bring in NBC News correspondent Rahema Ellis to help break down today's eventful start. Rahema, what an opening day. What more can you tell us about what's at stake here? What can Trump lose if he is found guilty of fraud?
Well, Sam, some analysts are pointing out this could be the former president's very identity. He is considered to be a real estate mogul, and if he is found guilty of these charges, he then could lose the very thing that brands him and that he has used to sell that brand. That Trump Tower could be lost. Mar-a-Lago could be lost. And this would be his very identity. So it's almost like his life in some measure, everything that he spent a lifetime working for, could be taken away if he is found guilty of these charges and liable and told that he has to forfeit some of these properties, surrender some of them in order to pay some fines. So there is a lot about Trump and his business that's on the line with this trial.
Indeed, almost a puncturing of his persona, if you will, based on, what we associate with the former president. Now, this day, Rahema, ended with some new information about a statute of limitations, with Trump's attorneys arguing that some of the state's evidence is no longer valid.
Well, they're saying that there was information that the prosecutors want to present that was gathered from 2011. And from 2011 to 2014, it seems that that is a tremendous amount of evidence that they gathered at that time, which they say is very crucial to the case. But Trump's attorneys are saying that there is a statute of limitations which should prevent them from presenting that evidence to the court and to the judge. Now, one of the things that happened was that the judge seemed to entertain the possibility of being willing to listen to a more substantive argument on that. It's important to point out that he didn't say that he would definitely rule in one way or the other, but it was encouraging, it seemed, to the Trump team that he expressed a willingness to at least consider it.
Okay, so that legal question still very much remains up in the air at this point. And Rahema, I wanted to also ask you about the former president's emotions, which appear to have kind of run the gamut today. Our producer inside the courtroom reporting he turned, quote, beet red when his former accountant was testifying. But then by the end of the day, he said he appreciates the judge who he had earlier maligned. So what was going on here?
Well, that appreciation for the judge is in reference to what we were just talking about the judge being willing to listen to arguments to limit the scope of evidence into it. This could be very beneficial, some are saying, to Donald Trump. But one of the reasons it seems that Donald Trump might have gotten upset and beet red was when his former accountant was on the stand. He was the first witness today, and he was asked a question by the prosecution regarding accounting principles. And he was asked who made the determination not to follow general acceptable accounting principles. And the reply was the Trump Organization. Then asked again by the prosecution, did they tell you why? And his response was, I don't know. And it seemed in that collection of examination, direct examination by the prosecution, that Trump was not pleased, and he began talking in a way to his attorneys. And as you point out, he got beat red with this kind of testimony coming from his former accountant.
Yeah, that definitely explains the angry reaction. And Rahima, this is just day one, so I guess buckle up. Thank you so much for that report.
You bet.
All right, let's now bring in NBC News Now legal analyst Angela Senadella. And Angela, thank you for being with us. Let's start with the legality of it all. First, I mean, for those who are confused at home, can you differentiate this civil case from some of the other legal action that Trump is facing? And also, for a man whose identity we know is based, partly at least, on his net worth, this feels kind of personal today.
Yes, I would agree with that. So the differences between a civil and a criminal trial are massive. The one that we're most familiar with in terms of consequence is that there is no jail or prison time on the table. We do know right now, though, that former President Trump is also facing criminal trials where prison is on the table. However, there's also one massive difference, which is that in a criminal trial, when you as a defendant enter that room, the presumption is that you are innocent. The prosecution has to prove that you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and you can walk into that room at least knowing that the jury is assuming that you are innocent. Now, this civil trial is totally different because Trump walked into that room today already knowing that the judge had ruled that he was essentially liable for these crimes, for all of this, all these damages, and the question is just the extent of the damages now that will be argued. So this is massively different. It is personal. He is showing up as, frankly, guilty.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that, actually, Angela. I'm glad that you brought it up. The fact that the judge in this case had already issued a ruling in order to get this to court that Trump was guilty of fraud. Why go through this case? And I mean, how does that fit within the context of the civil trial?
So this case is extremely complicated, and there are a lot of financial documents. At the end of the day, though, the judge said, based off of these documents alone, I can grant partial summary judgment here, and I can say there was some fraud. But the question that remains on the table is massive, which is, well, how much fraud? Is it fraud that's worth $250 million worth of damages, or is it much limited?
Okay, some fraud versus a lot of fraud is what's at stake here. I would also ask this whole idea of statute of limitations over some of the evidence. We heard from Rahima a few moments ago that there's all this evidence between 2011 and 2014, she said, that the Trump legal team is arguing is not admissible because it extends beyond the statute of limitation. What do you make of the judge's reaction when he heard that argument?
Sam, this is a big argument, but I have to say it's a little perplexing why the judge didn't rule on this prior to the trial, because these are usually motions that are brought up pre-trial. And so the fact that the judge did not rule on this and is now bringing this up is a little bit questionable. But it sounds like here it was because there was an accountant, Trump's former accountant, that was on the stand and that was going extensively over evidence from 2011. And the judge said, look, we have to keep this to 2014, so try to relate it back to 2014. I'm going to say that this means that the judge knows there remains fraud past 2014. So this is not getting Trump off the hook. This is just saying anything prior to 2014 is off the table. That does mean, though, that perhaps these damages are not going to be what the attorney general is looking for. It's not going to be $250 million. It might be far less.
Okay, so that could actually be a key decision, what the judge decides on that very question of statute of limitations. Thank you, Angela Senadella, for all of your insight there, for our legal analyst. Appreciate it. So today's civil fraud trial is obviously, as we've been just discussing, not the only legal action the Trump team is juggling at the moment. The former president faces now over half a dozen cases, and the web keeps getting more and more tangled by the day. NBC's Noah Pransky gives us a primer on what's going on with each one of these cases.
With more than a half dozen civil and criminal cases on his plate, let's sort out what Donald Trump faces in each state. Civil case number one, the New York Attorney General's case, now headed to what's expected to be a lengthy trial. A judge recently ruled that Trump and his family and their companies fraudulently inflated the value of their real estate, allowing this case to go to trial. The proceeding will determine other liability and penalties, which could total $250 million, as well as a ban on Trump business dealings in New York. The former president has repeatedly denied wrongdoing, and his attorney has already said he'll appeal the liability ruling. Civil case number 2, also out of New York, this one filed by columnist E. Jean Carroll. Here, a jury found Trump committed sexual abuse in 1996 and later defamed Carroll after she went public with her story. They did not find him liable for rape, but ordered him to pay $5 million total in damages. Trump denies wrongdoing and has appealed the ruling. In September, Carroll filed another civil case against Trump for similar comments he made in 2019. He has denied those claims as well. There's also criminal case number 1 out of Manhattan for allegedly falsifying business records to conceal another crime. A grand jury made up of 23 New Yorkers chosen at random indicted the former president for his alleged involvement in hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels in 2016, then concealing it to prevent the news from damaging his presidential campaign. Trump and his attorneys denied the accusations, and Trump pleaded not guilty.
There were no facts in there. I mean, normally in an indictment you have alleged facts.
Then there's Florida, the documents case. Among the criminal charges, conspiring to obstruct justice. It was federal prosecutors this time with a hefty, detailed filing alleging the former president hoarded classified documents containing national military and nuclear secrets, shared them with friends who had no security clearance, then conspired to hide and conceal some of them from a federal grand jury. The former president, again, denied the charges and pleaded not guilty.
The baseless indictment of me by the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Injustice will go down as among the most horrific abuses of power.
Criminal indictment number 3 came out of Washington, D.C. It's been described as the January 6th case, but it's really about the entire period after the 2020 election. The criminal charges here include conspiracy to defraud the United States. Special counsel Jack Smith wrote in a scathing indictment, the purpose of the conspiracy was to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election by using knowingly false claims of election fraud. He went on with great detail to describe how the former president deliberately disregarded the truth, was determined to stay in power, and developed criminal plans to defeat the federal government. Trump called the indictment fake, and his attorneys have suggested his actions were protected by the Constitution. He pleaded not guilty. And the 4th criminal indictment came out of Georgia. Prosecutors said the grand jury recommended charges against 19 defendants, including former President Trump. He was hit with 13 felony counts, including racketeering and a half-dozen conspiracy charges related to the 2020 election.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
Trump pleaded not guilty, denied wrongdoing, denied any pressure campaign, and called this investigation as well a political witch hunt. The timeline on these cases remains uncertain, but one thing we know for sure, the Constitution does not prohibit an indicted candidate from running for office, nor even a convicted one. Noah Pransky, NBC News.
All right, Noah, thank you. In our nation's capital tonight, more breaking news, this time as it concerns embattled House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida has now officially filed a motion to get rid of McCarthy as House Speaker, as he had threatened to do all week. Remember, it only takes one member of Congress to start this process. Take a listen to the moment on the House floor earlier this evening.
Declaring the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives to be vacant. Resolved that the office of Speaker of the House of Representatives is hereby declared to be vacant.
All right, so obviously a lot of technical jargon in there, but the bottom line is that Gaetz has basically filed a motion to oust his own party speaker from his job. This is something that Gaetz has been talking about for some time, especially as McCarthy really struggled to get his party on the same page for priorities in averting a shutdown. McCarthy has not yet responded publicly to that motion. Well, we have a lot coming up right now headed your way. That includes a late night TV is back. A lot of people savoring those words right now. The writer's strike might be over, but the actors union is back at the negotiating table today. Plus, later this hour, this looks a lot like Tom Hanks. Like, really looks like Tom Hanks, but he's saying that a dental ad featuring the actor is actually completely fake. We'll explain what's going on here. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Here are some of the other headlines that we're watching closely tonight. North Dakota State Senator Doug Larson, his wife and their 2 sons died in a small plane crash in Utah last night. A sheriff's department confirming that they crashed shortly after takeoff. Investigators right now are still trying to figure out how that happened. For the first time, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas has recused himself from a January 6th case. Without Thomas, the Supreme Court rejected an appeal from former Trump legal advisor John Eastman. Thomas, though, did not say why he recused himself. but Eastman used to be Thomas's law clerk. Well, summer may be over, but the heat is sticking around. Not exactly welcome news for those in Minnesota and the Twin Cities, where the marathon there was canceled yesterday over concerns of extreme heat. Temperatures in Minneapolis and St. Paul reached close to 90 degrees. Simone Biles made history as the first woman ever to land a complex double pipe vault. That was in an international competition yesterday in Belgium. The skill will now be known simply as the Biles 2. And the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg is being honored in a new stamp released by the U.S. Postal Service today. The oil painting portrait, look at that, pretty cool, is based off of a real picture of Ginsburg from 2017. Well, by the end of the week, hundreds of thousands of people could be on strike across multiple major industries. It is getting hard to keep track of at this point. We're going to get to actors and auto workers in just a moment. But first, over 75,000 hospital employees are likely to go on strike Wednesday in what is expected to be the largest healthcare worker strike in U.S. history. And more concerning, it could impact hundreds of hospitals and offices all across the nation. We're not just talking about a regional problem here. These Kaiser Permanente workers have been at the negotiating table since April trying to nail down a contract. The last time the two sides negotiated, that would be in 2019, right before hospitals were packed with COVID patients. On that note, NBC's Liz Kreutz joining us now with more. Liz, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Look, the largest healthcare worker strike in history. That sounds ominous. What kind of problems could this create at hospitals nationwide? And also, will patients still be able to be seen if they have an emergency?
Right, Sam. I mean, this could have a big impact on patients. One union spokesperson told us that basically any worker that keeps Kaiser running will be on strike. We're told that there will be picketers outside every single major Kaiser hospital in the country. This is 75,000 healthcare workers going on strike from a wide range of sectors, including vocational nurses, radiology, X-ray, and surgical technicians, pharmacists and phlebotomists who draw blood. Now, Kaiser, they have released a statement letting patients know what they need to know. They say we have a contingency plan in place to ensure our members continue to receive safe, high-quality care for the duration of the strike. Our hospitals and emergency departments will remain open, so that is important. They're saying they'll stay open, but that said, they have said some non-essential surgeries, some appointments will likely be postponed, and that patients should expect higher wait times, Sam.
All right, so ER rooms remain open. That is certainly good news there. Liz, what are the healthcare workers asking for specifically? And do there seem to be some sticking points that Kaiser just is not budging on?
Yeah, so the biggest issue at the heart of this negotiation right now is what union members call Kaiser's short staffing crisis. Nurses are saying that in their clinics, one person is often doing the job of 2 or 3 people. Earlier today, I spoke with the executive director of the Coalition of Kaiser Unions. Here's what she told me about why they feel they have to strike.
In our case, a lot of our members, 10, 20, 30 hours a week of overtime, not just because of short staffing, but also just to make ends meet. Frontline healthcare workers are working so much overtime that the stress and mental and physical toll it takes on their bodies is causing them to reconsider if they can keep going on.
She also says that that burnout is also impacting patient care, that they can't give patients the attention she feels they deserve. Now, Kaiser, for its part, says that they are dealing with this staffing crisis. They say that they have hired 50,000 frontline workers over the past 2 years, despite labor shortages, and that they continue to hire. The union, however, they say that that does not take into account the number of healthcare workers who have left Kaiser and left the industry during that time. Sam.
Yeah, it's just a challenging healthcare landscape. There's no way around that. Liz Kreutz, thank you so much for that report. Also now, U.S. automaker General Motors says it is temporarily laying off another 160 or so employees in the Midwest as the Auto Workers Union finishes its 18th day on strike. So it's now been almost 3 weeks. All of this as more employees join the picket lines. NBC's Jesse Kirsch has more.
Even with some picketing outside of a Stellantis facility here in the Cleveland, Ohio area, the maker of Jeeps got a pass in the latest round of strike expansions from the UAW. The union saying that the company made last-minute progress. Stellantis, for its part, says even with progress, there are gaps to be worked through. But General Motors and Ford did see strikes expand against them starting on Friday. And that's in stark contrast for Ford compared to what had happened a week prior, in which Ford had gotten a pass from a strike expansion. The UAW's president telling me he believes that Ford went backwards in negotiations. But Ford says it believes, the CEO says that he believes that the union is holding up a deal largely over electric vehicle battery plants. Remember, EVs are a concern for some. They potentially do not require as many jobs to be made. And so that is something that the union is keeping an eye on, and that has been discussed throughout these negotiations and even before a strike had begun. But as all of this unfolds, the stalemate continues between the UAW and the Big Three. Back to you.
All right, Jesse, thank you so much. If you have been craving new content during the writer's strike, you are in luck. Late night and daytime talk shows are back after going dark for almost 5 months, now that the writers and the studios have finally come together on an agreement. Now the focus turns to the actors. SAG-AFTRA and studio execs resumed contract talks today, and a lot of people are hoping that they can ride the momentum that was created by the Writers Guild.
You can't have writers without the actors. We both are a union, and we work together, and without both of us, it's not possible.
Yeah, it takes two to dance in all this. NBC's David Noriega joining us now with more. David, thanks for being here. So the SAG-AFTRA demands are slightly different than the Writers Guild's demands, especially when it comes to wages. Walk us through that.
Right, Sam. So naturally, we think of these strikes as being connected because they are. But it's also important to remember that we're talking about unions that in some key respects are very different, right? So just look at the size of the union. SAG, the Actors Guild, represents 160,000 workers. Compare that to the Writers Guild, which represents only about 11,500. And as you said, there are important differences in the demands that the unions have been making in terms of pay. On the one hand, the writers, in their first request to the studios, they asked for a 6% pay increase in the first year. They eventually got 5% in this tentative deal. The actors are asking for an 11% increase in the first year. So this is, if the studios do come to a deal with the actors, it could just cost them a lot more. It's been interesting since the writers reached their deal to see, in the time between when the writers reached their deal and the actors went back to the bargaining table as of this week, it's been interesting to see both unions kind of go to great lengths to make the point that these negotiations are not the same and that the studios can't expect to just take the deal they made with the writers and apply it to the actors. The Writers Guild actually put out a statement to that effect, saying that the sort of warning the studios not to push a deal that is, quote unquote, patterned on the deal that they made with the writers. They want the studios to come to the bargaining table with essentially a clean slate. Sam?
All right, so much for our optimism then, David, but thank you. It's an excellent point that it's apples and oranges, especially when it comes to the scalability and the size of these two different unions. If any wins that the Writers Guild had could be used potentially as, some sort of help or pivot point for actors, is there anything you can identify?
Yeah, so this is true. There is reason to be cautious, but there is also reason to be optimistic, and a lot of people are optimistic, right? Because for all that these unions are different, they are negotiating with the same people. They're negotiating with the same companies, the same studios and streaming companies, the same individual executives. And there are things that those companies did in the deal with the writers that are sort of very specifically signs of hope for the actors. Probably the two most important ones that we can think about are residuals and AI, right? So on the one hand, the studios were willing to create a system whereby writers made more money from streaming projects if those streaming projects turned out to be very popular. Similarly with AI, the studios were willing to make an agreement that protected writers essentially from being replaced by AI. Those are very similar to negotiations, very similar to demands that the actors are making. And the studios were willing to, in some very important, very deep ways, kind of rethink important parts of the way their business model functions in order to reach this deal. So one of the reasons there's kind of high hopes in LA today is because if the studios were willing to rethink such important parts of their business model for their writers, the hope is that they'll do so for the actors as well, and that, in pretty short order, Hollywood should be able to kick back into gear. Sam?
And it has been amazing to see how much AI is factoring into the very center of these discussions and the reimagination of the industry at large. David Noriega with a great, precise breakdown of that situation. Thank you so much. Well, coming up next, we have a closer look at what's going on at NFL games. And no, we are not, for once, talking about Taylor Swift. There has been a string of violent fights going on in the stands. What is behind this? I mean, you've got to see this. People also right now trying to figure that out and talking about the moon being made of cheese. This one apparently is filled of ricotta, we're told. Well, this photo that NASA just put out is going to keep you guessing. This is a never-before-seen picture of Pan. That is one of Saturn's 145 moons. NASA posting the photo on Instagram, saying that the moon looked like ravioli. That's making, no doubt, many of us hungry. Grab a snack. We will be right back. Welcome back. Here are some of the stories happening out west that we're following closely. The person California Governor Gavin Newsom chose to fill Senator Dianne Feinstein's seat is LaFonza Butler, the president of Emily's List. It's a move that makes good on a promise that Newsom made dating back to 2021.
If, in fact, Dianne Feinstein were to retire, will you nominate an African-American woman to restore the seat that Kamala Harris is no longer in the United States Senate? And do you have a name in mind?
I have multiple names in mind. We have multiple names in mind, and the answer is yes.
Some background on Butler. She's 44 years old. She's been a fixture in California politics coming up on 20 years. And although she's never held elective political office before, Butler used to lead the state's largest labor union. Well, football is a violent game. No one is denying that. But when that violence spills into the stands like it did during yesterday's Raiders-Chargers game, it's usually random and chaotic, and in this case, inexplicable. We don't know what started this fight between a fan of each team, but we do know it ended with the Raiders fan being clocked twice in the head. And you see him right there. He gets up and then is pushed down the steps. This is just the latest unruly case of violence in the stands at pro football games. Just last month, a New England Patriots fan died following being punched in a fight. And at first glance, it looked like any other high school football game under the lights, except this was something much greater. Over the weekend, folks packed Maui's War Memorial Stadium to watch Lahaina Luna High School football team play its first game since the deadly wildfires, and they delivered on a 42-0 rout of their opponents. And as one of the players said, the game was a reminder that, quote, when we're united, nothing can stop us. Tonight, Philadelphia police are looking for the person who shot and killed a local journalist inside of his home. 39-year-old Josh Kruger was a well-known freelance journalist in Philly, often writing and raising awareness for some of the city's most vulnerable communities. That shooting happened around 1:30 this morning. Kruger was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital about 45 minutes later. Now, police say they believe it might have been a domestic-related killing. Joining us now is NBC's George Solis from Philadelphia with more. And George, what do we know at this point about a possible motive?
Yeah, Sam, it's early on in the investigation right now, but as you mentioned, Philadelphia police saying that it looks like someone went into his home and fired on him 7 times. Now, he stumbled out of his home, fell there, and then a number of residents came over, called 911. He later died at the hospital. We should know, Philadelphia police noted there is doorbell surveillance that they're going to be using as part of this investigation. Josh Kruger was a well-known freelance journalist and advocate here in the community, so this has been rippling throughout the community today. A lot of people coming out and just in awe, in sadness, and in shock over his passing. A lot of people upset because they simply could not have imagined someone targeting him. That being said, Josh Kruger himself was known to sort of respond on social media to critics. And right before all of this happened, he did post in the recent days that there had been some issues around his home. One incident involving someone throwing what appeared to be a glass egg through his window. And then he posted on Facebook not long ago, about 2 weeks ago, that he had a visitor at his home that knocked on his door, threatened him. Those incidents, police say they are now looking at as any possible motive in this murder. But of course, right now, authorities don't have a motive. They don't have any arrests. So they are asking the public or anyone with information to come forward to help them solve this case, Sam.
Yeah, George, that's so interesting that there were possible breadcrumbs online about threats that Josh might have been experiencing. I also want to ask you about the Philadelphia community's reaction, knowing that Josh is someone who had talked openly about his struggles, George, with homelessness and addiction as informing his journalism. It sounds like he had a large footprint in Philadelphia. How are people responding tonight?
Yes, Em, as you know, all loss of life is tragic. But here, when you're talking about a journalist, it hits close to home for a lot of us who work in the field. And so we've been hearing today a lot of accolades, a lot of people remembering some of the work that he's done. And as you mentioned, he struggled with a lot of issues himself. And so for him to use that to inform some of his journalists, it's really been touching a lot of people today. And some of his friends who I spoke with today say this is just an unfathomable tragedy. Here's a little bit more from a conversation I had with a friend earlier today.
He was more than just a journalist. He was more than just a community member. He was somebody that fought the great fight.
All Josh was concerned about was injustice in its various forms, and he fought day and night to right those wrongs.
Yes, I mean, it wasn't just friends and fellow journalists. He touched so many facets of this community. He's worked as a city spokesperson. Members of the city, officials actually responding today. I want to quickly read some statements that they released after his passing. The mayor, Jim Kenney, saying, Josh cared deeply about our city and its residents, which was evident in his public service and in his writing. His intelligence, creativity, passion, and wit shone bright in everything that he did, and his light was dimmed much too soon. The district attorney, Larry Krasner, writing today, Josh Kruger lifted up most vulnerable and stigmatized people in our communities, particularly unhoused people living with addiction. Josh deserved to write the ending of his personal story. It really gives you a sense of the kind of man he was. And again, Philadelphia police asking anyone with information to come forward. And I did mention there is that surveillance video, so Philadelphia police hoping to bring this case to a resolution fast. Sam?
You can just hear the emotion in those interviews. George Solis, thank you so much for that report. As NBC News has reported, we have seen a rising number of migrants crossing into the U.S. over the last few weeks, pushing resources in many cases to the limit in some cities. And that includes hospitals, hundreds of miles from the southern border. NBC's Julia Ainsley takes a look.
Tonight, the border crisis surging. Officials telling NBC News there were over 200,000 illegal crossings at the southern border last month, and a record 3 million migrants crossed the border in the last year. Now, a new warning 1,000 miles away in New York City, where officials tell us resources are overwhelmed. Across public hospitals in New York City, a quarter of the patients are now migrants. Over the last year, nearly 30,000 visits by migrants and 300 new babies born to migrant moms. Staff here at Bellevue Hospital tell us they're eager to help, but the numbers are tough.
This has been the hardest work that I've ever done, but it's been the most impactful work that I've ever done.
And most of the visits to the taxpayer-funded legal clinic here are by migrants.
Our clinics are full, and there are waiting lists, and people are turning people away or referring them to other places.
Randy Redkin from New York's Legal Assistance Group says so many migrants are asking for legal help on asylum representation and health care access. Now, she says, American citizens who need legal assistance with issues like eviction and insurance have to wait up to 10 weeks.
If you ask me, do we need more resources for legal services, I would say absolutely yes.
Meanwhile, New York's governor now slamming the situation at the border.
It is too open right now. People coming from all over the world are finding their way through, simply saying they need asylum.
And New York Mayor Eric Adams saying providing services for migrants will cost city taxpayers $12 billion. But Biden administration officials have blamed Adams' response. It is not an operationally sound effort, one senior DHS official told NBC News. Meanwhile, migrants on the streets are desperate for city help. We met Orlando, who fled violence in Venezuela. He didn't want to appear on camera, telling us he slept on the street before coming to Bellevue for cancer treatment.
How is that for you, given your medical condition, to be sleeping on the street?
You have to make believe it's a good bed, a king size, and you lie down wherever and go to sleep, he says. Orlando tells us he came to New York because he heard about the social services the city would offer to migrants like himself, who were trying to start a new life. The Biden administration recently granted temporary legal status to nearly 500,000 Venezuelans, allowing them to work. Today, Governor Hochul announced there are 18,000 jobs now available to eligible migrants.
All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for that report. Coming up next, filmmakers can do some pretty crazy magic to get a scene just right, especially when you have AI at your disposal. But does bringing actors back from the dead go too far? Robin Williams' daughter thinks so. But first, the big headlines trending around the world and a look at a deadly nightclub fire in Spain. That's just ahead, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Let's take a quick look right now around the world in 80 seconds. We start in Spain, where more than a dozen people are dead after a fire at a nightclub that happened yesterday. Authorities say the fire quickly grew inside the club and it burned down 2 others right next to it. It appears the club was operating without a permit. At least 11 people are dead. That's a figure that was recently updated, and some 60 others are injured after the roof of a church just collapsed. This happened during a baptism yesterday in Mexico. About 100 people are said to have been in the church at the time this happened. Officials say the collapse was most likely caused by a structural failure. And in a rarity, a grizzly bear attacked and killed 2 hikers and their dog at Canada's Banff National Park. This all happening on Saturday. That bear was later euthanized after showing aggressive behavior. And it turns out that local officials say the victims were actually experienced backcountry hikers and knew about bear safety protocols. And police in Dallas are investigating the murder of a former employee of the royal family. 46-year-old Janine Chapman was killed inside of her home last week. The suspect was arrested yesterday. The Duchess of York, Sarah Ferguson, posted a tribute to her former assistant on Instagram over the weekend. Well, the former Joint Chiefs Chairman, General Mark Milley, is no stranger to attacks, either on the battlefield or in the political arena. Recently, he found himself the target of Donald Trump, who says that Milley's actions warranted the death penalty. NBC's Lester Holt spoke to General Milley as he prepares for his retirement and asked about the former president's comments. Take a listen.
Much of General Mark Milley's military career was spent in harm's way, especially if you include the reported and rumored battles at the White House.
Your legacy and Donald Trump's legacy are intertwined. Have you accepted that?
Well, I mean, that's a fact. Look, I'm not the president, never was a president. I'm merely an advisor to a president, to 2 presidents, actually. And our paths crossed, and I think that, history will obviously connect the 2 of us together, sure.
Yeah, some people would say you're downplaying the significance. I mean, you became a household name in many ways because of the reported clashes between you and the then president.
Yeah, generals don't have clashes with presidents. I think some of that is overstated, frankly, about clashes, like raised voices and arguments and all that kind of stuff. I rendered to President Trump just like I rendered to President Biden. I give him various courses of action and options.
But Milley was often described as a guardrail against the former president's impulses and made this apparent parting swipe at the former president during his retirement remarks.
We don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator.
A few days before the election, you were making it known that the Army, the military, would play no role in determining the outcome of the
Sure.
election. Why did you feel the need to say that? Was that a specific concern that you had?
There was a lot of discussion in the open media about the U.S. military and what role we would play and so on. So I wanted to make sure it was clear to the American people, to our adversaries, to our friends and allies overseas, but also to our own force, to us wearing the uniform, that we have zero, and I mean zero, role in U.S. electoral politics.
And you assured the Chinese at one point, your Chinese counterpart, that essentially the U.S. was okay, the U.S. was stable. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, that's right. And Secretary Esper asked me to make a call, and we did that.
Last week, in a social media post, former President Trump attacked Milley for that call.
With regard to your talking to the Chinese, he said this is an act so egregious that in times gone by, the punishment would have been death. A war between China and the U.S. could have been the result of this treasonous act. That's from a former commander-in-chief to a sitting chairman of the Joint Chiefs. How do you respond to that?
Everyone's entitled to their opinion, and I've served my country faithfully for 4.5 consecutive decades in peace and war. And my family has made enormous sacrifices for this country, and my mother and father before me, and grandparents before them. So I'll take a backseat to no one on loyalty to this country. And my loyalty is to the Constitution. It's to a document. It's never to an individual. And that's the loyalty of every single one of us in uniform.
During Milley's tenure, there was the chaotic Afghanistan withdrawal when 13 U.S. service members were killed in a terror attack, many of their families criticizing Milley for a lack of accountability.
Has anyone been held accountable to what went wrong with the Afghanistan withdrawal?
Well, if you mean has anyone been specifically punished in some way, no, but look at Lester. That war didn't end the way anybody wanted it to end. This is a 20-year war. There were decisions made over 20 years that landed us where we did.
And a warning from Milley about the threat from China following that spy balloon.
How would you characterize their espionage efforts? Or have they
Chinese espionage is quite good.
Have they infiltrated the Pentagon? Have they infiltrated the U.S. military?
Well, I can't imagine that they haven't tried anyway. I'm not going to go over details of what they've infiltrated, not infiltrated, but they are a very, very capable intelligence collection organization.
Our Lester Holt with that wide-ranging interview. Before we go, it's time for the future of everything. And right now we are talking AI. We'll tell you why Robin Williams' daughter and Tom Hanks are both urging caution when it comes to the tech. Stay with us. It is time now for the future of everything. And tonight we're talking about two pioneers of the mRNA COVID vaccine and that Nobel Award that they just received for their work. But first to Hollywood, where concerns right now over AI seem to be growing. Robin Williams' daughter Zelda ripping AI on her Instagram account recently, calling a recreation of her dad's voice, quote, disturbing, and expressing her support in SAG-AFTRA's fight against AI and their negotiations that are ongoing right now with the studios. She's not the only one. Tom Hanks has also entered the chat, too. Now, check out this picture of him. We're about to pull it up. He is warning folks that's not really him. There it is. But an AI version that is not Tom Hanks. An AI version of himself being used to sell dental plans online. You could understand why conversations are at fever pitch on this particular topic. Well, the discovery led to a monumental medical breakthrough. Now, two scientists have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine for their work on mRNA vaccines. Despite the groundbreaking achievement, they were not expecting this. NBC's Andrea Mitchell has more.
The Nobel Prize in Medicine, the last thing a pair of scientists expected when the phone rang at 3:40 this morning.
My husband picked up and he was talking to somebody, and then he just handed over and said, "This is for you."
Did you believe it at first?
Not really, because, people can make jokes.
I also thought it was a prank or an anti-vax joke or something.
Especially surprising because their work had been ignored, even ridiculed for decades. They were working in different departments at the University of Pennsylvania when they discovered each other at the copying machine.
I have to say that working together, that was the real reward.
Born in Hungary, Kariko came to the U.S. in the 1980s. We first talked to her, Andrew Weissman, 2 years ago when the COVID vaccines were becoming more available.
Talk to me about how skeptical people were about the value of RNA.
I don't know, did we listen to them? Not really,
I mean, everybody was skeptical, but we didn't care.
Together, they found a way to create a vaccine that got past the body's defenses, but still prompted the immune system to make antibodies to fight disease. Now their discovery is leading to new vaccines for AIDS and sickle cell anemia, even gene therapies to prevent some cancers. Her message to young people?
Just hang on and be resilient and have fun and enjoy.
Katie and I certainly didn't go into science for money or for awards. We did it because of interest and curiosity.
And the joy of saving millions of lives. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
And the moral of that story is when your significant other says this is for you, it may actually be really good news. So just keep that in mind. Ending this hour right now on some breaking news as well. That police chief who ordered, you may remember, a raid on a Kansas newspaper has now resigned. His name is Gideon Cody. Just last week, he was suspended indefinitely by that town's mayor. You may recall this is all back in August. In Marion, Kansas, police officers raided the newspaper's office, as well as the home of its publisher, Eric Meyer, taking computers and phones, among other items. The 98-year-old mother and the co-owner of that paper died following the searches. Her son, the publisher, blames the stress of that raid for her death. Not to mention, of course, the assault on journalism that was also entailed in that. That does it for us tonight. I'm Sam Brock. We will see you back here tomorrow. But until then, stay tuned.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.